Hi, I'm Stacy, and welcome to Beyond the Mic. This is a space where we dive deep into the moments, stories, and breakthroughs that shape who we are and who we're becoming. Together, we'll explore personal growth, mental health, and the motivation you need to create lasting change. This is more than just a podcast. This is your moment to break free, rewrite your story, and step boldly into the life you've always dreamed of. It's time to stop holding back, to rise, to thrive, and to transform. Let's go beyond the mic.
I know we were talking before starting the podcast a little bit, but just so people can get to know you and I guess understand your journey, I don't know if you can take us back a little bit towards your childhood and what have been some major things that happened in your life that have shaped you into pursuing law.
Okay. So like I told you, I'm from here in El Paso. I was born here literally on Paisano Street, like, a few yards in, and I lived from ages 0 to 18 here in El Paso on the east side near Cielo Vista, went to Eastwood High School.
Okay.
I grew up living with my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister. And my biological mom lived in Juarez for the better part of my upbringing. So I always kind of I was one of the people here that I know a lot of people are like this, where I was here during the week, Monday through Friday, in El Paso. And then on the weekends and on extended holidays and everything, I spent my time in Juarez.
And then if you're from here, like every time that you're trying to go to Juarez, like every day, not even just the weekend. I mean, you see all the lines of all people that, they're coming for school. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know if it would have been better not to come every day, especially, I grew up in, I'm 40 now, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s.
You can't really tell.
Yeah.
You're just surprised they were saying that.
Yeah. But, I think growing up, I remember when I was little, I would just have like this little passport card. I don't even know what it was. It was just this little green thing. And you would just cross the border and you would say American and that's it,
I
right?
remember.
Right.
I used to just say American
and so...
Not even a birth certificate.
Right, exactly. And they kind of just was like, they kind of were just gauging your accent and gauging how the conviction of when you were saying it, so... but no, I think I grew up a very split personality, not in a negative way, but I felt equally uncomfortable at times, depending on the context, in both El Paso and in Juarez, and so I had two different, very, very big paradigms on both sides. I grew up with my grandfather in a big house that used to house like 13 people, all my extended family members, but it was just kind of my mom, my grandfather, and me at the time in Juarez. So it became like this cool little adventure, and Juarez was always like really good food and, kind of, I don't know how to say it, like just kind of desmadre one way or another in a good way, but, had my cousins there.
More fun over there.
Right. A little bit more spiciness. And then here I would come to do my kind of normal school life. I played soccer my whole life from basically the time that I could walk until, after college. And so...
Did you play soccer during college as well?
No, I ended up going for more of the academic route. Okay. That was kind of always one of the things that if, you always think about your time machines, like if you could go back and see how you could maybe change things. I kind of wish that I would have been able to kind of go somewhere where I could have leveraged soccer a little bit more. Yeah. Just to avoid getting fat, like, at fat. But also, and we'll talk about that later, but that's one of the things that really formed me going into it is thankfully I had a very strong academic background, thanks to my parents, thanks to very key mentorships that I had growing up. And I ended up kind of going the pure academic route, right? So I ended up going to Rice in Houston, which was, it still is a very good school. But I kind of abandoned soccer I played in college, but I wasn't recruited, and they didn't have like a program.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of recreational at that point.
Did you finish your entire university there?
Yeah. So I went and I finished, and I graduated in 2007 from Rice. When I was in undergrad, I ended up studying abroad in Brazil, and my junior year there, and I loved it there. I loved Brazil.
I love the language.
Yeah. So
I have a friend that's from Brazil, and every time she speaks even English, I'm just like, can you tell me a little more?
Yeah. So I ended up in undergraduate. I studied kind of like one of these interdisciplinary things that was called like Hispanic Studies at the time, and it was kind of like they had a base curriculum, but you could kind of pick your own adventure. And mine was kind of I did a little bit of everything. It was kind of like linguistics a little bit. It was kind of like comparative literature, Latin American history, all these different things. And so Brazil was very interesting to me. Aside from like feeling very close to my heart because it was very soccer driven. It reminded me a lot of Juarez in particular. But the kind of work that I was doing there, I'll tell you about that in a second, but it was very easy for me to kind of start the path to Portuguese. And so I kind of acquired Portuguese very quickly. And going back to what we were talking about, like right now, like ahorita estoy pensando igual y simultáneamente en inglés y en español. Entonces podríamos intercambiar without any sort of issue, right? And it's kind of like I try to explain it to people that it's not so much that you're thinking in one or the other, but that you're actually in both, at least for me. You kind of have like...
Can you do that with Portuguese as well, or not
really? Claro. Com português agora eu posso fazer isso também. E eu acho que é em parte porque a gente cresceu aqui fazendo isso, né? So that's basically just saying, yeah, I can do that in Portuguese too, but I think it's because we grew up thinking like that.
Yeah.
And so, at Rice, which is an engineering school and all this kind of stuff, they also had a lot of interesting technology. I remember being in a lab that would... You'll appreciate this because you're an SLP, but it'll tell you like when your phonemes are off. It's gauging your phonemes based on software. It's kind of like what Duolingo was before Duolingo, right? But you could go in and you could kind of just put your headphones on and you could pick a language and you would just recite it and it would tell you like, oh, you're messing this up, or like, like for example in Portuguese, like the nasal sound doesn't exist in Spanish, right? So from a linguistic perspective, it tells you in the zone of the mouth where you're supposed to be forming that. And so that coupled with hearing and living it and all that stuff, it really fixes the acquisition of the language, right? So you kind of break it down. But going back to your original question, I'm sorry I'm straying.
No.
I'm sorry I'm straying.
No, you're not.
But what was it that kind of led me into the path of law, I think? One is, as anybody who's from here knows, like you cross this imaginary line and then there's this vast difference in everything, right? We're the same person, but we're living two different existences based on where you are in Juarez or where you are in El Paso, right? And so when I would go to... Every Friday when I would go to my grandfather's house, he lived in an area called Nogales. It's kind of it's central, right? So the distance is not that much. But I would go over there and I'd be like, man, like this is completely different from, Cielo Vista and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think at the time I had a very kind of formed idea of, oh, the reason why the societal difference is here or because of the impact of the rule of law and all this stuff. But when you're growing up, you're thinking, why is it so different, right? It's the same people. It's the same people on both sides. Why do the streets work over here? Why does mail get delivered over here but not over here? Why is there violence over here and there's nothing over there, right? And so I think, at least for me, growing up, you kind of have that little inkling in the back of your head of like, why is it so different? And I think one of the big answers to that is like the legal systems, right? your jurisprudential thing, which also ties into history and ties into society. But I think one of the things that I grew up with implicitly feeling is, why is it different? And does it have to be? Right? And I think as I was growing more and more, I saw that law was kind of like an interesting kind of encapsulation of that. I always saw law as more of an anthropological sort of like, oh, that's interesting that here, you know, you do the real estate now, for example, is a very cool example. Like the bodies of real estate law are very different in the US and in Mexico and in all these other countries. But I saw it as a lens to see the differences and understand, oh, it's because this one was based on a code and this one was based on Anglo-American and on all these different things. So I think law soothed a certain part of me that was asking, like, why are there differences? That's one thing. The other thing is, I think it really reunites a lot of interesting things or interests of mine. So like language is one of the biggest like passion points for me in life. You know, like the same way that I can speak Portuguese to you, I took French, and you drop me in France or you drop me in some Francophone country, and after like 2 or 3 days, I'll be able to get my bearings. And so for me, like, you know, law as the practice and utilization of language to achieve a specific goal was, again, another soothing point for me, right? Again, but going back to our original point, I never knew attorneys. You know, like everybody in my family is in the medical field. Growing up, it was kind of like one of those things where like you knew somebody who went to court, you know, but you didn't know people who were attorneys, right? And so I didn't, at least for me, I didn't grow up, and my brothers are 10 years and
I have a lot of those.
yeah. Hey, why are you wearing a suit? Oh, I got a court date. And so you're like, oh man, and that's the extent of your exposure to like the what legal life is, right? And so I never knew what law was going to be day to day. I think it kind of always like me llamó la atención. And then as I progressed in my studies, kind of got funneled in there. So going back to go ahead.
So do you think that you didn't see yourself as an attorney? It was more like an evolving thing over time?
Yeah, exactly. I think it wasn't one of those things. I think, yes, to answer your question, it was definitely not one of those things where I was 8 years old and you asked me, what do you want to be? And you're like, I want to be an attorney. You know, I didn't know what an attorney was. You know, abogado, I thought that was a fruit, you know, like something like, you know, yeah. And so it wasn't something where I had this clear path, right? It was more of a collection of passions that seemed to be pointing back to these things, right? So passions and questions, right? The questions of why are things different, the passion of language, you know, how can you do this? I grew up kind of very strong in math and this kind of stuff, but I never really imagined myself using that. And also I think I was always just more driven to like the language aspects of it. I love like history and all these different things. And if you really peel back the layers of law, it's a lot of encapsulation of what was happening at specific moments in time historically. A lot of lawyers don't think like that. A lot of lawyers just want to know what the law is, not why the law is. And that's perfectly fine too, and that's part of your training as well. But for me personally, I like to know the reasons why certain things happened.
And I personally think that everyone has their history and their reasons why they just worry about, I just worry about the law. But to me, I think someone that cares what's behind, there's a lot more power than just knowing because that's what it is. You know? Like, because you start to question, you start to, well, this doesn't seem fair. Like, how can I change it? How can I move around to make things happen? I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to your point, I think, yes, in general, but then I'll also isolate the word power, right? When you're growing up in this area, I kind of re-encapsulated it to you as something that was kind of just happy-go-lucky, but it wasn't always easy growing up. I felt sometimes I would hate going to Juarez. sometimes I would hate coming back to El Paso, you know, and it was something where you felt lack of control. At least I felt a lack of control, you know, like in the old doctrines of law, they say habeas corpus, which is Latin for have your body, right? Have control of your body. And I felt like the 0 through 18 or 0 through 15, when I was going back and forth very heavily, it was a study of not having control, right? It was, you're going to be speaking English all the way here, and then all of a sudden, no puedes hablar en inglés, aquí están tus primos, vamos a hacer esto, nah, que tal madre esta, you know, and then so it's very different. And it's sort of like keeping up with and assimilating into whatever you're thrown into, but not having the ability to really dictate your own destiny.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people growing up here kind of had the same thing, right? Some people be like, man, I can't stand El Paso. It's so boring. And like, I hate going over there.
And you know, I think there's a period of time where you don't feel like you're from there, and you don't feel like you're from here.
Right.
So there's a lack of identity almost, because when you're over there, life is very different, and then when you're here, you have to restrain yourself, and it's not the same as going, or from my experience, I don't know if it's the same for you, but when you go over there, it's almost like you know your neighbors, you know the person that lives 5 houses from your house, and right here you barely know the ones like right next door because they're never home, they're always working, or they're always inside. So this lack of identity, like it does really play a role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if you stay here your whole life, or even if you don't really leave somewhere, that identity is always going to be with you. And I think the more times you go back and forth, the more, you know, sometimes I'll talk to my therapist and be like, well, what was the trauma that defined your childhood? And I was like, it's not really one trauma. It's not like something happened. I walked in on something and something happened. It was more like a collection of every time that I had to go cross and come back. It wasn't necessarily a trauma in a negative way, but it was an impactful thing.
Yeah.
It
shaped you.
It shapes you. And so one of the things is, I think, very difficult to understand if you're not from here and if you don't grow up with that, is how cumulative that effect is, right? So like if you grow up, and I've tried to sometimes when I'm trying to go to sleep or something, count how many times I've crossed Juarez and back, right?
Almost like having sheep.
No, it really helps.
Yeah.
To fall asleep, because you'll never, I mean, I stopped at like, you know, and then you do like some like weird engineering, like I'm going to extrapolate the number. If on an average given week I do 2.2 crossings per week, extrapolated over 52 weeks over 18 years, blah, blah, blah. You know, you do this and you're like, well, I think the ball, you know, this, but then you do, well, the exception for Christmases and when you forgot something, and then you're like, okay, I'm roughly at like 5,000 right now, okay, that I can remember. And so, you know, when you present that to people that are not from here, they're like, oh, I don't know what that's like. You know, it would almost be easier to have one traumatic or 2 traumatic or 3 traumatic episodes in your life, because it's kind of just like defined kind of things that you can like really face, right? And I've done a lot of work with therapy and this kind of stuff too, just because my mind is very kind of tends to go off the deep end, and then the legal profession is very much like inserts these intrusive kind of thoughts into your brain, even if you don't want to, like, oh my God, I forgot to put this number there in this contract. But one of the things that I've always kind of had to explain to everybody that I'm working with and this kind of stuff is like, it's not one thing, you know, but at the same time, it has a lot of positives, right? So, you know, when I've gone to different places, I end up kind of assimilating in very easily. So like went to Houston for undergrad, went to Brazil, and like my Portuguese became very strong very quickly. So the year after Rice, I stayed at an oil and gas law firm because I was kind of thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was a paralegal there, and I just did business immigration law.
Like paralegals do a lot more. I mean, they're overworked.
Yeah, no, paralegals, especially based on the practice, So, for example, real estate is one of them where if you have a very strong paralegal that's helping you with closings and this kind of stuff, they're invaluable. And there's really no difference between, and actually many times you'll be recurring to paralegals to help you do the actual things because, fortunately or unfortunately, law is a very, it's a very abstract practice sometimes, right? Like you're not working with your hands to begin with. And then also a lot of times you're not doing a lot of the things. You're making sure that things are done, right? Like you're making sure that you have to pay stamp taxes on a mortgage, right? In Florida or wherever. Texas doesn't have them, but Florida. And so, but then actually going and actually doing it and calculating it and making sure that the county receives it and getting the receipt that you did it, that's not something that traditionally the lawyer's doing, right? Either for traditional reasons or for economic reasons, because our hourly rate becomes too expensive. And so a lot of times you get to, you understand things, but you haven't done them. So no tienes el callo en la mano. And a lot of times the paralegals do, right? And so a lot of times, and that's one of the things that I like about real estate law. And I'll tell you about the ARC. We can focus on that. But like, I came back in 2013 thinking that so I'll tell you about my education. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. But after Rice, I stayed for 1 year in Houston. And I was working at a law firm, and one of the big clients that they had was a Brazilian company. And I took it more as I was in law, but I was using more of the language thing. So I was helping them a lot with their visas and speaking to the client who's in Brazil. And so my job was much more interfacing with people and then making sure that the work was being done. And during that time, I kind of graduated with this idea, but not this like super driven focus of like, I'm going to go to law school by this time and then do this and then do that. I was like, I'll apply to law school. I was taking the LSATs. I was trying to get a higher score for LSAT. I didn't know at the time then like that it's probably better to sit out and really focus on the LSATs for a little bit and then do it. But I kind of got a good enough score to apply to different schools. I applied to Northwestern in Chicago. Again, it was based on the city. I really liked Chicago when I went. And it was like kind of the best school that I could get into. And I really liked it when I went, this kind of stuff. And I had my admission there. But I also was applying for a scholarship to go to England. And I got the scholarship. So I deferred for 1 year my entry at Northwestern. And I went to the London School of Economics to study law there. But it was the anthropology of law. It wasn't like, it was a master's to understand different facets of law. And it was like super fascinating because it's exactly what I was talking to you about, which is it's not really like, you're not learning legal provisions and this kind of stuff, but you're looking at different things that happen in society. Like, how do you buy a house? Like what is the real estate? How does real estate work in one country versus another? How does divorce work in one country versus another? What does it mean to have a contract in one place or another? And that year that I was in London was super, I think it was probably the best year of my life because it was super international. There was like 10 people in my group and I was the only American. There was people from Cyprus, and American, you can barely call me American, but there was people from Cyprus, from Italy, from Norway, from all these different places. A lot of them were already practicing attorneys or had been to law school because it's an undergraduate course in most of the world except for the US. So it was there. And then also the scholarship cohort where I was in was very, very tight knit. And the people in London, like they just kind of gave you an amazing experience. The scholarship director she was very well connected into the arts. And so we would get like tickets to go see theater in the West End. Where I lived in High Holborn to my school, I would pass by a Portuguese bakery. I'd pass by this Italian place. I'd pass by a Mexican restaurant. And I was always friends with everybody, And it was cool there too, because it was like the first time that people knew that I was different, but it wasn't like, oh, you're a Mexican person. Like what like in Houston, Houston's like, yeah, you're Mexican, bro. Like, you can't even hide it. In London, people would be speaking to me in different languages because they couldn't figure out what I was. So they'd be like, like Zindabosh, Tajikistan, and I'd be like, what? They'd be like, oh, you're not Tajik? I'm like, no, I'm not from Tajikistan, bro. What is, bro? Or they'd be like, I'd go to some rally or something, or go to somewhere and there's like a rally going on and people would like interview me and be like, oh, what do you, what's this Kurdish movement about? I was like, I have no idea. I'm not Kurdish. But it was fun, and I had a really good time there, and I think that year really consolidated for me being like, hey, you know what? Like law is something that I'm really passionate about, even if it is kind of like more intellectual than it is practice based. And then I came back to Chicago and started my law school there. Mm-hmm. I will share that it was very difficult for me to adjust back because London was so magical. Like London was like this thing where it was like, I could do this and it's like I'm living. And also like it's just from a soccer perspective where I grew up, it's like one of the beating hearts of the world for soccer. And so I was 23, 24 there, and I was just like, man, I don't know. Yeah. A part of me was like, I should stay here and see, like if there's anything that that I could probably do is just make this work some way. But I just didn't have a lot of belief in myself then. And I was like, you have this kind of sure thing in Chicago. You have this law school thing. Go back to it and we'll see, how it goes. There's always, when you're younger, you're always thinking like, I can always come back to these things. Now that I'm 40, like I can't. I'm thinking like, no, time is actually very, very restricted. But anyway, at the time, I came back to Chicago, but I was finishing my dissertation for LSE, and I was starting first year of law school. And I got into this kind of like this just crazy depression because I came back and I wasn't like, Chicago was fantastic, but it wasn't London, Yeah. In London, I was going every 2 weeks. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Turkey and I'm going to go to Croatia and I'm going to go to this and that. And I was actually doing extremely well academically because I work well kind of on an on-the-go situation. If you just kind of sit me there and it's like your only job is to do this, it's very hard for me. The same thing with languages. If you sit me there and you're like, all you have to do is learn these grammatical rules, I cannot do it. Mm-hmm. But if it's like, you need to go to Brazil tomorrow, or you need to go to Saudi Arabia tomorrow, and you need to learn Arabic, like tomorrow, and then you're like, Inti batkalami Arabia shwaya, like it's like you're just like, I could do that, but I could never do it in a book. Like you put it in a book, you're like Inti, I'm like Inti, and that's always how my mind has worked. So when I came back to Chicago, a lot of things just kind of piled up on me. I was trying to finish this. I was coming off of this like this perceived kind of high point in my life, and I was like, ugh. And then it was. The cold doesn't really bother me, but the gray at 3:00 in the afternoon kind of bothers me. And also like law school in general was just miserable. People in the profession say like, if you love law school, you're going to be a horrible lawyer. And if you hate law school, you'll be vice versa. And I hated like the vibe of law school. The people were nice on an individual basis, but it was like the collective feeling of like everybody, your stress levels like 3 levels higher than the highest thing that you've ever experienced before. Yeah. And I got to a point where I wasn't sleeping. I was like, this is too much, man. And
my husband says that he's not a lawyer, but when he was in college, that he would put the book on his head. Like he would be sleeping and then he would just leave it. Like maybe it will go into my brain, and then he woke up in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the night, and he was like, "Oh, I remember this," and then he would read it. But I can't imagine law school.
Yeah, no, and actually on that point, I would fall asleep all the time, and I would actually hold my book up like that, so that when I fell asleep, when I fell asleep, it would hit me and wake me up. I also got all these like weird injuries from reading because you have these big case law books your first year, and they're thick, and I would always read with them kind of like in this position.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
What's up?
No, say it.
No, I was like this, and then one time I had to go to the doctor because I pulled a muscle, and they're like, "What were you doing?" And I was like, "Reading." And I was like, that's when I knew, like, I was like, "Man, this is like legit different." But anyway, I ended up going to the dean my first semester and being like, "Yo, like, I don't mean to scare you or anything, but like, I'm not sleeping, homie. Like, I'm not." And you know, I'm not the type of person to like, you know, just kind of walk into the lake here or something, but I this is not doable. I have to finish this thing in London, and like voy a quedar mal con ustedes y allá también. And he's like, just take a medical leave and just start the next year.
Oh wow.
And so
that's really nice.
Yeah. And so I ended up kind of in November, kind of towards the end of semester, which was like I wasn't absorbing anything because of all the kind of, and also I think when you're growing up, I wouldn't really consider myself type A person, but I was always very like, I saw academic success as something that was going to give me more control. And, you know, when you go through in high school, you're like number 5 in your class, and then you go to Rice and you do pretty good, and all these places, and then all of a sudden LSE you do well, and then all of a sudden, right, and then all of a sudden you get here and you're like, bro, you're how many people are there in your section? 200? Okay, yeah, you're number 201, or you know, like, and that was the first time that I got handed this super heavy dose of like, you're not. Like, this isn't. I went back to Chicago. I took this time off. And so you had to start. It's one of those things where you can't, like, start the semester or the second semester. It's all kind of builds on itself. So I ended up staying in Chicago because I already paid, like, I was on the contract there. But I ended up doing a bunch of, like, random things. I ended up doing, like, I did a little bit of stand-up comedy.
No way.
Yeah. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because I took that year off, and I was like, yeah, I've always kind of been like a spiritual person. I grew up very Catholic and stuff, and like, I don't particularly think I'm Catholic, but I am very like, I'm trying to kind of feel like, what am I doing? You know?
Yeah.
And when I had that.
At least you have a purpose.
Right. Exactly.
There's a reason behind
right.
it.
And so as part of that, I was like, well, maybe it's not my purpose to do this, and maybe I should go and do things that I feel are my purpose, right? And so one of the things that I always wanted to do growing up was like do stand-up comedy and acting. And I was like, well, I'm here. I'm forced to sit on the sidelines of law school. You know, the dean was like, basically just tell me August 1st if you're coming back or not. I always had the idea of coming back. And
I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, once they take a break, it's really hard to go back.
Yeah, and I think it was good that I was in Chicago because I kind of was just. So I ended up volunteering at this place, like the National Immigrant Justice Center, and this other place that was like, you know, there's a lot of Mexican population in Chicago, and I ended up volunteering during the day. I was also like reading a lot during the day. I took Arabic, and then I was doing stand-up comedy, and I was doing like little random jobs like tiling stuff. So I was like leaning back into my Mexicanness. You know, I was like laying tile. Yeah. I was laying tile. Yeah, no, laying tile, doing all these different things, and kind of just doing these things. And it was fun, but I got a little bit scared too because I saw how hard it was.
A little bit of reality check, no?
Yeah, I was getting reality checks all over the place, and I was also trying to, as a condition of the medical leave, I had to go to like a psychologist, right? Because you can't just say like, I need this. They're like, oh, you need to go and get this, and the psychiatrist was like, look, man, like you need to. This is like a real big thing that you're going through, and like you and thankfully I had a really good psychiatrist in Chicago. She was a psychiatrist and a talk therapist, and she was like previously been an attorney too. And so when I told her all these things, she's like, yeah, that's
You can relate.
Yeah, and she was very good, and she kind of helped me just get back out of that really deep hole where I was, that led me to be kind of to the point where I needed to tap out for a little bit. And I think a part of me, kind of just was trying to be like, let me see what else I can do. Let me see what else kind of moves me. And, I still came back and I still really loved like law. I really liked it. I thought it was cool. The stand-up comedy, like I started doing all these open mics and stuff. I had people, it was okay, but I was like, man, this is gonna be like 10 years of like hardship.
Yeah.
In retrospect, maybe I would have gone that route, but something in me was telling me to go back. So I ended up going back to law school.
Over the weekend. Have you tried it just to like?
I want to be one of those guys, like the dudes that go to salsa dancing and they're like accountants, but they take ballroom dancing and they come and they like, maybe I'll do one of those things where I just like kind of, it's like a enhanced hobby.
Yeah, I'll go.
I'm just like typing my briefs or whatever, and then all of a sudden get up and then make people laugh. Yeah.
And not me.
But so we'll see. But so I ended up I finished law school in Chicago. That was 2010 to 2013, and then I moved back here. And then again, so law has been interesting because it's been kind of like a series of roadblocks / pauses / detour signs.
The one thing that you really thought it was going to be just like a straight path. I'll just go to school, I'll graduate, I'll do all this test, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly.
And then things didn't go that way.
Right, exactly. And I mean, now I kind of live by this whole thing of, if you want to make God laugh, like tell him your plans, because it's like one of those things where it's like, no, so many things will happen to you. Yeah. And so many kind of like chingazos de la vida, going all over the place.
So what do you think, aside from law school being very difficult and, having to take that leave so that you could realize, I guess, your purpose or realize that you really wanted to pursue law, what has been one of the roadblocks or challenges in the early career that shaped you, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I think that not even in an early career, but throughout I'm 12 years into my career now, and I still feel a super deep level of self-imposed doubt of like, they call it imposter syndrome, but I think like imposter syndrome with an El Paso Juarez flavor to it.
Yeah.
Because, and I have a bunch of theories about all this stuff. I actually, I want to write a book about the different kind of underlying things. But like one of the things, for example, that I always talk about with one of my friends, with Ricardo, is, when you grow up here, like you're taught, like for example, when I was growing up in Spanish, and if I said que, my mom's like, limpia tu cuarto. She goes, and I go, que? She would like prop up, and she'd be like, no se dice que, se dice mande. Yes. And I'd be like, and I'd be like, oh my God, okay. And one of the things that when you grow up and you accept that and it's drilled into you, right? Yeah. Yes, on the one hand, it's part of tu educación, right? Like, así no se habla con las personas. That's good. the problem is that when you take that mindset into one where you are literally breaking the ice for your kind of cohort of people, or for yourself even, there's no space for you to have kind of the softness and the doubt that comes with it.
Yeah.
So if we peel back the layers, just literally linguistically, what is mande saying? Mande is saying, mándame, hacer lo que usted está diciendo. It's putting you in a subservient role, right? So, and by the way, Mexicans are the only ones that do that, right? You talk to some Argentines and they're like, ¿qué, boludo? No, sí sé qué, o perdón, o lo que sea, pero no se dice mande. It's actually one of the pejorative things that are associated with Mexicans, right? Like, it's like, that's so funny that you say that stupid thing, like, send me. But, and you know as well as anything else, like, language is so much of the way that you mediate your understanding of life and society. When you are going through that and you're teaching yourself always hold back.
Like that book called Hung by the Tongue.
I don't know that one.
It's a very small book, but it talks about how, you know, everything that you say,
right,
you know, is like you're hung by your own tongue.
Exactly.
Like words are very, very powerful.
Absolutely, words are extremely powerful, and you can look at it through different things, and it's all the same thing. You know, like your throat chakra. What you start doing that, then you start. You know, what you think is you believe. What you say is what you believe. And here we're taught to be very submissive, and we don't even know that. But just with that one word, Monday.
Yes.
Okay, it is always putting you in a position of passivity and submission, which is good when you're trying to be nice to your mom, but is detrimental when you need to show that you have the force of intellect, the force of conviction, the force of desire to penetrate into a space that has been historically closed off to you, right? And that moreover, when you are in there, that you're able to operate, right? And so one of the things that has been accompanying my whole kind of career arc is that thing where, even though I'm hyper aware of it and I don't say Monday, like if I, you know how some people say, like, if you could get rid of something, like what would you do? You know, like, world peace and all this. I would get rid of Monday.
Stop being submissive.
I would eradicate the mindset behind it.
Yeah.
In terms of professional, I'm not saying that I'm a self-hating Mexican. I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place. It's beautiful, and I think I'm extremely proud to be Mexican, especially now that I'm in a situation where we're not heavily Mexican. I always jokingly say that Mexicans have a branch, but we don't have the main office in South Florida. You know, so I'm just like a representative there. And when you compare it to different places, like, you know, you can even order somewhere. You can say, "Le puedo encargar por favor otra orden de whatever," right? Whereas somebody else from another, you know, Latin country would just be like, "Tráeme más papas," you know? It sounds very nice and sweet, and it has a certain charm to it, which I love. And you have to be able to use it, and you have to be able to own that part of it, right? La calidez humana. I think Mexicans in particular are one of the biggest emissaries of calidez humana.
You feel the warmth.
Absolutely. When you go there, when you do this, and I've always tried to do that into my profession, and that's what's helped me, is that I get along with people who are, you know, I don't see hierarchy. You know, even though now I'm in a very senior role, I'm in a leadership role, I'm in a management role, I still talk to everybody in the same way that my mom kind of told me to be always very nice to people in that role. Right, as your equal.
We're all equal, and I think it does help feel like if you are in the leadership role and you do that, I think that it helps the other person feel a little empowered.
Right.
And they feel more comfortable in a sense that they can pitch in ideas.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, they know that you're the boss, but since there's this sense of empowerment, you better the production. Absolutely.
Cooperation, empowerment, you know, that you're not going to shut down the ideas. But anyway, going back to what I was talking about, like it's difficult because that does create a register of doubt. And then a lot of the things that you have to do if you want to get to a higher place, require a very forceful use of conviction, right? It doesn't mean I'm not saying violence. I'm saying you have to be unshaken in your ability to do these things. And law is one of those things where, there's a reason why lawyers are not very well regarded, because they tend to be very argumentative. They tend to be very brusque. They tend to be very kind of matter of fact, right? And so if you grow up in a situation where matter of fact equals grosero, right? Then you're always going to think to yourself, am I being a jerk? And then you're also going to think, if you grow up in a place where no digas que, dimande, then you're going to grow up in a mind where it's like, well, can I please ask a question, please? Instead of saying, people are looking to you to be like, no, absolutely not. The code says this, and this is what we're going to do. Thank you. Right? And so one of the things that's difficult is that auto-imposed mindset. And the more Mexican, the more deep you are, the more you went back and forth, the more you got shot down for que no me digas que, cabrón, dime mande. The more you felt that, literally, sometimes it was but the more you felt that, the more that's going to be exactly. The more conditioned you are to doubt yourself. And a lot of the things, regardless of profession, right? Regardless of where you are, it's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing this in England. Hey, you shouldn't be launching a podcast. Hey, you shouldn't be doing this. This whole societal collective, you shouldn't be, right? Which is what you're always facing when you're trying to build into the next level, is already present, right? And so when you have another layer of yourself being like, maybe that's right. Maybe that is true. Right? You're like, wait, chale, you need to be like, no. Like, yeah, I know you're going to say this is a stupid idea, but respectfully, it's not your life, and it's not this. And yeah, I know, but whatever. Y aparte sí, te voy a decir mande, pero de todos modos voy a hacer esto. It's very hard to do that without being labeled like a crazy animal.
Yes.
And so that's one of the things, and believe it or not, I consider myself very academic. I consider myself very intellectual. But that has invaded a lot of my own doubt. Like, sometimes I'll procrastinate a little bit, which has to do more with other things, but also like sometimes I'll sit there and I'll be like, I'm not going to pass this bar. I'm not going to pass it. Or I used to think that way, right? And it's like, and it's okay for that. But then you end up kind of breathing that into life.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that's always been difficult. The other thing that's difficult is that, for me at least, it's a lonely profession. Like, no one really told me, like,
yes,
you kind of, it's like, I think like editing, it's like you just kind of sit there with the computer and you're looking at the same thing over and over and over, and you're just like matching up time, and it's like, oh man, this is horrible. Like, this is like, but it's part of the process, right? Yeah. And but no, I mean, that's it. And then, so anyway, I was here for 2013. I worked in-house at a bank holding company. It was fascinating because it's like all bank regulations, all about history, like stuff that happened during the Depression, why this is happening here. And it was, when I started, I was implementing a lot of what they called the Dodd-Frank Acts, which were after the 2008 meltdown. There was a lot of changes, especially to mortgage origination. And so my job here was kind of implementing the legal stuff into things that banks needed, in addition to helping with all the different parts of running a business. And that was awesome here. And I kept kind of trying to pass the bar, and I couldn't. I was always like very busy with work. And so the bar is one of those things where
you have to
dedicate the resources. It's envisioned that you do it once, like during your summer after you graduate law school, and you study for 6 to 8 hours a day for 3 months. And then you just kind of do it and you're done. And you practice in that one state forever. And that just wasn't me.
Well, you don't have to take it again.
Right. And it's also very linear. Like the legal profession is very linear. And as you can tell by the fact that I'm answering this one question with 75 different things, my mind isn't linear. And also like the trajectory of my life has not been linear. So that's one of the things that's always kind of difficult too, is people like in law, they're like, oh, you're a 2013 graduate, so you're at this level or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but the first 4 years I wasn't really practicing, and now I'm this and that. So there's always like this asterisk. But anyway, when I was working there, I really, really liked real estate transactions. And in law school, one of the things that I really liked was negotiation. So you can take
I would love to tap into that. Do you have any tips for people? How do you sell yourself?
How do you sell yourself?
Yeah. How do you manage? How do you manage the room so that things go the way that you want them to?
I think our negotiation was more kind of understanding. Well, the big thing is empathizing and understanding what your interests are, right? And I think, again, that's a really big plus of being kind of growing up kind of in our mindset, is that we tend to be kind of the nicest people. And the reason why we're nice is because we're approachable, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things in negotiation that you're always looking at is like understanding the interests. Is this an interest-based negotiation? Like, yeah, at the end of the day, Stacy's doing this or whatever, but she's got this isn't for money. This is for understanding this. This is for understanding it. And truly understanding the whole parameter of people's interests as much as you can. There's always going to be things that you don't understand. Mm-hmm. But that's one thing that really helps you. The other thing for me is being very aware of how you come off, right? So like sometimes, and then doing something a little bit counter to that. So for me, for example, if I'm wearing like all black, like I am right now, tell people I'm from Juarez, like maybe they'll be like, oh, this guy's kind of a little bit rough, right? But then I'll crack a dad joke, and so it's a little bit disarming in terms of doing that. And the other thing is just knowing the details about what you want specifically. So like when you're buying and selling anything, right, you always want to know like what the best alternative is to not reaching a deal. They call it the BATNA. So like if this doesn't happen, then I know I'll have this other option. And so a lot of it is developing like the detail work, being like, oh, I've researched this. I know the guy down the street is willing to sell me the same house for this much. So when you say things, you're not really like pushing it. You're just like, mm-hmm. if this doesn't happen, then I'm going to go down the street.
To be on the other person's side.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you're just like, okay, well, here it is. And that's it. Mm-hmm. But the negotiation stuff is kind of like this club where you compete and they give you case studies and you're supposed to negotiate deals. And so sometimes you have to represent sellers and sometimes you have to represent buyers. But the vast majority of those case studies are real estate because they lend themselves. Real estate has a lot of moving parts, right? It has like the terms of the contract, and then it has all the financials, and then it has like the prorated things that are going back and forth. Mm-hmm. So it's a very dense thing to understand, like where negotiation can kick in and where there's options. And so I really liked real estate, and I think in my mind's eye, I was kind of like, oh, if I could choose, I would want to do real estate because I like the transactional side. I like the stuff. It seems very practical to me.
Did you get any mentor?
No, I had.
Or did you lack on that?
Mentorship? Mm-hmm. I never really, maybe it's because I never really felt like the general counsel that I worked for here. He taught me a lot about practicing law, and he's a very, very intellectually powerful person. He would he was a former litigator, and he would just be like, this is what the code says, this is what you should be paying attention to, this is where it comes from. And he was a mentor in terms of like intellectually guiding me to break down these things. But in terms of somebody who had gone through the same arc as me, and somebody who had failed, and somebody who had kind of like stuttered their way through and was, apenitas llegando, no, I don't think I ever had that. And I think it was interesting that you said that, because I think at that point in my career too, I was also like, man, I don't have any mentors or anything. And I wanted to be a mentor for people. And so when I was burning out on the law school, doing the law and the bar exam, I was like, I need to go back to something that's like really, really like a deep passion of mine, which is soccer. And it just kind of came into being, I think, from being here in El Paso again and seeing a lot of, like, it was at the time when the locomotive was coming to get started, and people were like, hey, we're going to try to get a team. We're going to try to get this and that. There was a lot of energy. The people that I worked with at the bank were very close to the people who ended up developing all that stuff. So I was always very kind of into it. And then I also wanted to go back and form some sort of mentorship thing. But I just felt like I couldn't do it in law, because I was barely I wasn't like, here I am.
I mean, you were still in the process of figuring it out.
Yeah. But for me, I was like, high school soccer players, like, yeah, that's a demographic that I know. And so I wanted to, in much the same way when I got out of my first try of law school and I was like, I got to go try this stand-up comedy and I got to go do this crazy stuff. I also, at that time when I was feeling like I was getting into my career, I was like, I need to do something that's also like for my spirit. And that's what the nonprofit was for me. And so I launched this like program called Project Combina in 2016. And it was when I was working at this bank, and it was basically, the idea was to help.
So you founded it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I founded it.
Okay. I thought you worked for...
No. I started it myself, and the idea was, and I didn't know anything about nonprofit world. I didn't know anything about anything, but the idea was to help people who were in high school who played soccer, kind of with the process of whatever their next step was going to be.
Your baby.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so it ended up being kind of one of those things where I just come home and just sketch into my notepad, like, this is what I think it should be, and this is what it should look like. And when I was 14 or 15 years old, I wish someone would have come and told me, you can do this or that, or helped me with this kind of things. And so the whole premise of it was, if you were to make a run on soccer, how would you do it, or how would you do it? And I think one of the things was like being able to sell yourself, right? Being able to dictate, like being unafraid when you're growing up in soccer here in El Paso. It's kind of a parallel to a lot of things. Like, you're actually really good. Like, you grew up here in El Paso and Juarez. Even though we don't have a huge infrastructure of what they call club teams, which are more dedicated to traveling, the fact that you grew up here and in high school and stuff, you'll see, even though it's recreational, you'll see a lot of very high quality players there. A lot of raw diamonds, diamonds in the rough, or whatever it's called. Whereas you go to, Dallas or Houston or wherever the next big city is, and you'll see a lot of people that are like not as technically good as you, but they have a staff of people that are helping them, right? Their parents are injecting a lot of money into their things. They go to a place where there's club coaches that know how to get you into college. They know how to accentuate what you need, right? But from a raw talent perspective, at that point in time, sometimes it's not close. Like, we're very much above it. We just don't have the infrastructure to make successful ongoing bids every year, where it's like, this person from Socorro is now going to a Division I program. This person from Eastwood is going on. And it's getting better, but it's not been the same thing. And again, when you're a soccer player, right, you're amazing. You come in, and you're just like, man, I'm like the best guy here, right? But then you go to a soccer tournament in Capel or somewhere in Dallas, right? And these guys, again, they show up and they got, you know, 2 different sets of uniforms and stuff, and that you feel intimidated. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not the best anymore. Or, you know, the Monday starts to creep in again. And it's the same, it's a parallel, it's a huge parallel between what goes on in soccer and what goes on in your professional life. Because you are, objectively speaking, you are good enough to hack. You can do this. But you're coming from a place where the infrastructure isn't there and where the belief system isn't there. And the belief system, in addition to not being there, is being negatively reinforced on a daily basis.
So you were building this nonprofit while you were still trying to take the bar test.
Right. So one of my goals was, I think the way that I started it was, okay, I think it got to the point where I was like kind of hitting my head a little bit against the wall. And I was like, I just need to rest for a second.
Okay, you rested while you...
Yeah, I'm still working, but it's obvious after a couple tries that I'm doing something wrong with the bar. So rather than try to like just gear up and do it again and then fail again by, 3 or 4 points, again, I was like, I want to do something different. Not from the job perspective, I kept working, but I had gotten to a point where I was strong enough in my position, or I at least knew how to operate it, where I wasn't like super, I had a couple hours at the end of each day to devote to this. And so the idea was, hey, let's just go there and maybe this will help nourish kind of like this other thing, maybe your spirit or something, what it is, because it's very important to, as you're going along and doing these like hardcore things, I'm doing this law school thing, I'm doing this bar. Like I have found,
you're still feeding your soul.
You have to do something. I never had like a family or anything like that. A lot of people get that from, their family, from their significant other and this kind of stuff. And I, for one reason or another, it just hasn't panned out for me like that yet. But, I think I take on these projects where I like will write or I will do something. And that was one of the things.
Oh, wow.
And so we developed that and just kind of started growing it. And that was very helpful because it got me exposed to a lot of different people.
And what happened after, how much time did it pass until you took the bar exam again and passed it? So
I actually, in 2016, in August was the Combina, and then I passed. So by this time, it was already kind of coming to be expected that this bank was going to sell. And also I was like, maybe I should go to some other state. So I actually registered for the New Mexico bar in 2017. And I passed that in the fall of 2017. So it took like another year. And so I had the New Mexico license, and I ended up just using that to try to go somewhere else. And the reason being is that sometimes when you are in recognition of like, hey, like it's just not working out here, you can keep going. And I've done that. But then sometimes it just makes more sense spiritually, logistically, to go somewhere else. And for me, I was like, I'll go and take the bar in New Mexico. That will help me get access to other states that are part of what was called the UBE consortium, which is like Uniform Bar Exam. And then we'll just go another path. So I ended up doing that, did that. Then I went to Colorado. Colorado was not a great fit for me. It was a beautiful place, but it was like really, there wasn't much for me to do. And then that finally forced me to be like, ahora sí. Like, ahora sí. Well, no, it was more so of ahora sí, like you're going to go do real estate.
Okay.
And you're going to go to a big city. And you're going to go and whatever is necessary to do for that, you're going to do it.
So what do you think, what habits or what mindset helped you, in such a competitive field, pursue what you wanted to do?
For me, it's very simple. It's absolute persistence. I don't know if it's because I'm an Aries or I don't know what it is, but it's just like being extremely hard-headed.
Okay.
If you want something, to be undeterred by what your path looks like to get there. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think that I'm not particularly special, but I do not get tired of knocking on doors.
Okay.
And I've had a lot of friends. So one of my best friends in law school, he also had a very similar path, that he didn't really find like his dream job immediately after law school. And I think he ended up going another path, traditional law. He still practices, but he's kind of more of a different mentality where he's just like, oh, it just didn't work out, so it's not for me. And I'm not like that in the first few hundred times that I try something.
And how do you think you're staying motivated right now after, you put a pause, you open up this project, but then you went back and you're like, okay, now I'm going to really go into real estate. Now that you're in the pursuing that, how do you stay motivated without tapping into everything else that you did?
I don't think it was like that kind of like, it was like a bright line thing where it's like, it's just kind of like I got tired of certain things. Like I just was like, I'm tired of not having this option. And I think a part of me was like, you're being a hypocrite, bro, to myself. Mm-hmm. Because it was like, it was kind of like one of these things where it's like, well, you're angry about like the Mande mentality, but the Mande mentality is the one that's keeping you in Colorado and this kind of stuff, because you think that it's like, oh, you'll do little baby steps. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of one of those like self-talk sessions where you're just like, tell me straight up, what do you want? Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, I want to do real estate. And okay, what else do you want to do? Well, I want to live in a big city. Okay. And what else? And like, okay, you want to use your Spanish and your Portuguese. Okay. So then do that, bro. Like to myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, well, I tried this other stuff. Didn't kind of work out. And so then I was just like, then I became just knocking on doors. New York, LA, Miami. And finally, one of my friends from law school, like I connected with her on LinkedIn and was like, hey, I know I haven't talked to you in like 10 years, but like I'm really trying to get a job in real estate. And, no one's picking me up because everyone thinks that I'm broken, And she's like, oh, let me connect you to this person. She connected me to the person who I ended up working with for 3 years at this huge law firm called Greenberg Traurig in Miami. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I just kind of went over there. Ricardo went with me to Miami, like packed up. And it was because I was able to sell myself to these people, And I think one of the things, again, going back to one of your earlier questions, like how do you sell yourself? You sell yourself by being extremely genuine and aware of these things. And I remember telling the person that hired me, I was like, look, I know I'm old, like for what you're supposed to be doing. I'm coming at this, I'm in my early 30s and the people that I'm competing against are 25. But, the window is closing for me and I am extremely motivated to do this. Mm-hmm. And for me, I wouldn't recommend this for a lot of people because it gets me in trouble more than it helps me, but it's just who I am. But sometimes I'll just tell people like, look, like, what do you have to lose? Like, if I don't pass the Florida bar, like I will quit. I will quit and I'll go do something completely different. But the plus side of this is that you have somebody who's a little bit more mature, mm-hmm. that you have the ability to present to your customers that this guy speaks like fluent Spanish, fluent Portuguese, and I'm talking business Spanish, business Portuguese, like no degradation from English. And, you know, I have the mindset and the personality that I'll help you develop business as soon as I get caught up on the technical skills. Mm-hmm. And I think when you are forceful, I mean, that's not forceful, but when you're telling people like, come on, let's just do this, and you create the vision with them, people are much more open, right? And they're like, look, Stacey, like, I can see us doing this. I can see your podcast doing this and that and that. One of it's like, part of it's like, oh, this guy's just crazy. He's just brainstorming. But another part of that is like, actually, that might work. Mm-hmm. And so you want to be with those people that are like vibing with you. And I ended up working with them for 3 years. It was awesome. It's just law firm life in that level is super demanding. Yeah. But that's kind of how it was. And I think you kind of use a combination of all the things that you quietly are learning here. Mm-hmm. How to deal with people, how to assimilate very quickly. And then you also do a combination of interrogating the things that are holding you back from growing up here. Yeah. Like, yes, I know what mande is, but I say que and perdón as well. Mm-hmm. And being a little bit unexpected. And then you kind of recur to whatever your magic sauce is. I tend to be a little bit more aggressive and more like, come on, let's do this. Yeah. Other people are super sweet and nice and very positive and rosy, right? I try to be like that, but it's just not who I am.
Now that you're talking about the personalities, what do you think it's one of the misunderstandings, or what's something that people misunderstand about your profession or your path to success?
About being a lawyer, or about me, like, in particular?
I mean, both. A little bit both.
I mean, I think the profession is still, like, you know, I think a lot of people have this idea that lawyers know a lot of stuff, when really we're just taught to find out a lot of stuff. Okay. And so a lot of times we're like, we have to go talk to this lawyer, they'll be able to help us. Like, yeah, but we're also going to have to, like, research a lot of things and do these different types of things. Unfortunately, I think a lot of stereotypes about lawyers are actually
true. I'm trying to make
I'm trying to say something like, give us a break. But there are a lot of things that are horrible, because you're like, well, this guy said this and that, and so this and that. But I think the really, really good lawyers that you work with know when to go into the hyper technical and when to just be very straightforward. Mm-hmm. You know, like, can you do this or not? Yes, you can, but this is what's going to happen. So this whole thing about maybe and it depends and all this stuff, some of that is the truth. Like, that's how it is. Like, we don't know. And a lot of that is, like, lawyers thinking that that's how they should respond. Right? And I particularly like to be a little bit more straightforward and just be like, yes, because this. If you want the explanation, here's a footnote. Like, under this thing and under this doctrine and under this and that. But by and large, I think that's one of the things that's, like, misunderstood, is like, well, they're going to know the answer. It's already like they're going to spit out the answer. And especially in the U.S., it's not like that.
What do you think? What's the misunderstanding about you?
The misunderstanding about me, I mean, a lot of times when people see my name, like, you know, they don't think I speak English, you know? So sometimes I'll just call the opposing counsel and be like, hi, you know, just want to introduce myself and this and that. I think that sometimes people think that it was an easy path. They're like, oh, you went to good schools. You know, you can express yourself well and this kind of stuff. But they don't, and this is not particular to the profession, but I think it's particular to all humans, is that people don't understand exactly how difficult certain things have been for other people. And there's a tendency to minimize, like, oh, she's fine. Look at her. She's got a house. She's got this. She's all together. And then, of course, you peel back a layer and you're just like, man, And but no, I mean, I think that's kind of just more of a human thing.
By the cover.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think it's been interesting. I now I kind of am at the point where I want to continue practicing for a little bit, but I'm looking at kind of starting my own thing. As you've seen, kind of the theme of this all is I like to create things, whether it be a nonprofit or, a failed stand-up career. But I think that's the next phase. I don't know when the next phase is going to be, but that's kind of what it is. And I think you kind of have to maintain a sense of humor throughout all of it.
Yes, you have to.
Yeah. You're just like, this is ridiculous.
I see this meme that says, like, what do you do? How is it? It says something about, I have many problems. What do you do to overcome? Like, I just make fun of it. Like, you just have to. It's almost like if you don't find, the silver linings, it's very difficult to overcome it, to be honest. Yeah.
No, exactly. And you kind of have to maintain the ridiculousness of it all. And I think, again, that's something that we're all very fortunate to be, because, I mean, if you look at El Paso and Juarez, it's a funny place too, and it's inherently funny, just how many contradictions there are and everything.
And now looking back, what is one moment that you're most proud of in your career so far?
It's interesting. In my professional career, I think one of the first assignments that I got at my first job was, so we were based here in El Paso, but we had bought banks in the Denver area and a mortgage company in like the Dallas area. We had stuff in Las Cruces, Albuquerque, and all these different things. And I think for a lot of times in your life when you're growing up here, like, oh, we don't have that here. We have to go to wherever. Oh, he has to go see a doctor in Houston. Or, oh, the next nearest place that they can go do that is Los Angeles. Or, like, there's no direct flight there, so you have to go wherever, So we're always, like, the outside, and then we're like this. But I remember kind of one of my first assignments was going and kind of mixing with one of the mortgage companies in Dallas. And we had kind of that friction of, like, all these guys are coming from El Paso. What do they know? But it was interesting because we were like the leadership, right? So we went, my general counsel and we went and we're like, this is how it's going to be. This is, we're here to support you and this kind of stuff. But for me, it was the kind of inversion of like, oh, they're coming from El Paso to tell us how, not to tell us how to do this, but the leadership is there and this kind of stuff. And for me, it was a moment of intense pride because it was the opposite of what I was telling you. And it was also an area where I felt like that was one of the first few times that I was like, whoa, I'm a lawyer now. And I'm like doing this. And so it was the culmination of a lot of things and the switch of things. But it was like a rinky-dink example. Nothing happened. There was no like candles or confetti or anything. But it was just one of those things where it's like, oh, that's pretty cool that a lot of the work that you do to come in is actually paying dividends in the form of changing perceptions.
And if you could, because we're about to finish, if you could say something short, like just small advice to people that want to become attorneys or that, not even attorneys, just they want to pursue something new or a new career or they have a dream of doing whatever it is that's in their hearts, what kind of advice would you give?
I would say to just be absolutely true to yourself and to take time to really nourish your spirit as you're going along with things. I think one of the things that I never really paid attention to growing up or whatever is to be kind to yourself. And when you do that, there's a tendency for things to kind of move in the direction that you need to because you're self-finding things. So a lot of times we don't know, be driven by that, but in the process, be kind. And on the first part of being driven, like, absolutely believe that you will get there. but just be kind in the process.
I love that. Thank you so much for being
No problem.
here. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
That was very interesting. I'm pretty sure there's a lot more that I say.
Yeah.
You have a very vast experience and everything. I would love to hear about the stand-up comedy and
There's a lot
that you
of
went. Because that's really interesting. But once again, thank you so much for taking the time, just sharing your story, and I'm pretty sure someone's going to be very inspired by this.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you once again for listening to the podcast. You can watch on YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify.
Hit that like and subscribe button.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Smash it.
Click on it. I dare you. Something's gonna happen once you do. Well, thank you once again, and see you on the next one.
Ciao.